Take it
Well,
away, Mark.
hello and welcome to Mark My Words. This podcast series is offering a glimpse into alternative paradigms hiding just beneath the surface of everyday life. Where our first question of the day is always, what if? And this episode, as our what if for this episode, is what if we interview Mark Cornelius? And Mark has covered a lot of ground in this series right here in our first set of episodes and everything like that. And we have prepared a list of questions for Mark. And before I bring him in, I just wanted to let you know that if you do have, for any of you thinkers, any of you listeners that are out there that are interested in some of Mark's material or interested in asking Mark a question, you can put any kind of thing forward to us at your discretion. And hopefully, by the end of our sessions here, we'll be able to put up some addresses or some way by which you can get in contact. Thank you for these questions. And Mark, welcome aboard as always. Um,
Hi, Paul.
this is, hey there. This is just a whole lot of stuff that we have been wanting to talk to you about, and I think it's just about time we did, especially since we're kind of winding up the first series. Um, we've covered a lot of ground over the past set of episodes here of Mark My Words, and the topics we've touched upon flow through all of your books. What has inspired you or influenced you to express your ideas from early on? I know that that question is one for, especially for young writers, for people that are commentators, and using that inside the actor's studio, James Lipton type of interview method. What stirred you to? What motivated you to get started with all of this?
It's a great question, and I loved your entree into there. What if we interviewed Mark? It's like turning the mirror around. It's so easy for us to explore the glorious outer rim of the universe, but then when you start looking at your personal life and saying, does this really apply to me? So
Good,
when,
good.
when you suggested this, I said, okay, here we go. Let's open the book. But what inspired me? Wow, we're going back years here, but I had started out literally when I was a young guy. I thought I was going to be a rock star, kind of like you. And I thought, hey, man, I'm going to be a rock star. I'm going to get into music, and I'm going to write music because that's what I love to do. And I did. I made a couple of albums, wrote some musicals, and that was all good and fine. But it didn't really launch well. Didn't take off like a rocket ship. And I struggled through that. I said, okay, so what am I doing here? Because I love, portions of this and other portions of it just aren't fitting. And how do I do this? Um, and then one day I just got an inspiration, and it was okay. I'll call it a God thing, and we'll talk about that later. But it was an inspiration from a higher power, I believe, and it just said, take the music out of it. And I was a little taken
Wow.
aback. Yeah, take the music out of it, and I realized I just needed to write. Didn't I love music, and it's still a part of my life, a rich part of my life. But for what I was trying to fulfill or feel fulfilled in, it was the written word that really made the big sense. So at that time, um, an event happened in Nashville, Tennessee, where you, my friend, are still just hanging around. And what happened was a tornado going through town. I'm sure you remember back in the late 90s when that happened. Uh,
Absolutely.
and it was a horrific thing. I mean, it went right through downtown. You go, oh my gosh, who would have thought of such a thing? So we became involved helping out with the community at that point, and it really impacted me. It deeply impacted me, and so I started writing out my thoughts, but I did it in a very strange way. I wrote a conversation with God. It was rather one-sided. He wasn't answering back at that time, but I was just kind of pouring out my heart. Um, I got finished with it. I said, well, I gotta test this on someone to see if I'm you know, on the right track here, in the right rut, right? So
Uh-huh.
I shared it with my wife, and she said, "This is wonderful. Do you mind if I share it with a friend?" And I went, "Okay, it's only my deepest personal thoughts shared with my creator. Sure, go ahead." And she did. And okay, please, for perspective, there was no such thing as podcasts. There was no such thing as blogs or anything else. There was just email. And I get this email back from my wife's friend. She said, "Can I be on your email list?" And I went, "What email list?" I had
Yeah,
no
no kidding.
clue. So I said, "Okay, there's an email list suddenly." And so I started sharing, and more people started gathering into the quote unquote email list, to where there were hundreds and then, more than that. And so I believed I was on the right track. And then another friend did a real crazy loop thinking thing to me and said, "You need to write a book."
There you
I
go.
said, "Yeah, there you go. Oh, sure. I need to write a book. What in the world am I going to write a book about?" And I'm sure every writer's gone through this, and probably a vast majority of the population is out there saying, "I have a book inside me, but what is it? How do I write it?" And I was
Right.
right in that spot. Um, and I didn't want to write a book about these, these sharings, as I'll call them, the journals. They just did not really, to me, feel like they were book ready. So I was just, I was chewing on that, and I had a great conversation with, at that time, my 14-year-old son. We were just driving around, and I kind of shared with him, doing this, and I don't know what to write about, or if I even should. And he said, "Well, Dad, what have you been thinking about?" I mean, this is coming from a 14-year-old. I love it, because that should tell you something about that depth that can come early. Anyway, long story. Um, I started thinking about what is it I've been thinking about that's really been pondering in my mind, and it came right to me that I've been thinking about that I was in a rut, and then I thought, well, wait a minute, is being in a rut? We all express it that as a negative. Oh, I'm in a rut. I've got to get out of this rut. I got to change directions. I got to do this. What if, and there was that first what if question right there. What if being in a rut is a good thing? And it was an immediate revelation to me, Paul. I just said, "Oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of that before." So I started working out the notes, and up came Rut Management, discovering adventure in the routine of life. And that's how it all started. Those two things. First of all, being in a rut, being a good thing, helped me track and redefine how I was looking at my course. But also, that just amazing little tagline at the beginning. What if? Are there other what if questions out there? And there turned out to be a whole slew of them.
Oh
That's how
yeah.
it started. That's how it started.
That is grand, and you sparked something here because when you said that about what if rut being in a rut is a good thing, that by comparison to being in a rut is a bad thing is a form of critical thinking, so which runs through so much of your own publication, and some of the issues that you have dealt with in the books like marginalized, uh, unmeasuring, and specifically, of course, the lessons that you are presenting in rut management, which kind of brings me to another question. It's been asked simply because much of your writing does stem from rut management. And by the way, the official name, of course, is Rut Management Discovering Adventure in the Routine of Life.
It is indeed.
All of your clever explanations and observations and rules that are spelled out in these pages bring about a whole, I guess, in some ways, a paradigm, in other ways, a whole set of things to do in order to manage a rut management. And whichever way you, by the way, that's also off of perception, another topic that you've spoken greatly on. How did that whole notion of rut management? Now, you told us about your personal experience.
Mhm.
When you were writing rut management, did you do any other? Was it mostly personal? Did you do any other interviews with other people?
Oh,
Did you do any kind of research, or was this all coming from your heart and your head and your soul?
oh, it was all about me, Paul. No, no, it wasn't all. No. That would
Well
have
said. Very
quickly
clever.
gone, yeah, that would have quickly gone into the flushing mode very quickly. Um, no,
I know you owe too well.
thanks.
That is exactly where it would have gone. In fact, it wouldn't have gone even that far because it would have never happened.
Right. This had to be something that, and that's what I do with all my books and writing, and for that matter, thoughts and podcasts. Um, it has to reach out to others. Now, I'm not in the, I can't get into other people's brains, but I can listen to them. And that'll take us to another book later on. So I was listening and I was looking and observing and reading and studying. And I love to go back in history to gain perspectives that are far earlier than mine. So I did that with rut management and started looking. I mean, one of the greatest examples, um, ironically, ties something to the 20th century with the early first century, and that is the space shuttle. Okay, now there aren't space shuttles anymore, but there were at the time I wrote the book, and there was a question: is why did the space shuttle have to be certainly configured so that um, well, they had to have measurements of exactly a size, and everyone thinks, well, that's because you have to fit the rocket fuel in a certain size rocket. No, not at all. It had to fit on a railroad cart and to be transported. And
That's
to do
right.
that,
That's right.
you had to know, well, it might be too big. Why don't we make bigger railroads? And then it got to another question. Well, where did the railroad gauge the measurement of the width of the tracks? Where'd that come from? And believe it or not, it came from the Romans. And people go, what? The Romans? Well, the Romans had carts that they pulled things around on, and they built these Roman roads, and those Roman roads were based on two oxen put together in a yoke and a cart behind it. So there was a width, and that created nothing less than a rut in the road. And they built those roads that they had, those beautiful, magnificent Roman roads, to cover up those ruts. And so they had to be a certain width. Well, that certain width became the standard for all roads all over the world, everywhere. And then at some point, far, far later in the distant future, they became the measurement for railroads. And so a railroad gauge is two ox butts wide. I mean, if you want to put it in perspective, I thought, oh man, so there you have it. Um, that that's the kind of thing I wanted to look back at and say, okay, so this has affected people before they even knew they were being affected, and somebody planned out that rut. So how did that get to be? Why do we still follow them? And what is the good of it? Well, you get off of a rut, an unpaved road, you'll know really quickly why a paved section or a planned section is good, because it gets more difficult if you go off the beaten path. And there's a phrase, by the way, beaten path is exactly from trying to beat the rut out of the road.
There you go. And oddly enough, when you brought this up just the past couple of days, I have been doing a little research on British archaeology, and most in particular during the Britannia, which was Roman Britain. One of the things that they are finding all over, especially the southern coast of Britain, England, around Dorset and stuff, are unresearched sites with roads that have come out. And one of the ways that they can identify those roads is through those ruts. And you see the soil difference from one to the other because of the difference of the way the ruts were filled with layering soil over the millennia, or and in their case, I think that was like from 150 AD. So we're looking at like 2,000 years of this particular road intact, but yet, a dusty road, if you will. But you can identify it. And just as you mentioned, one of the things we're unfamiliar with a lot of that. You became familiar with the whole notion as an inspiration to help you come about giving some I guess some energy to this whole notion of rut management and it not being a bad thing.
And it's a perspective. And so the question leads to, what's that have to do with, Paul Jurgen, Mark Cornelius, and everyone else on the planet today? And it has to do with the things we're shaping and have been shaped by, that lead us and can misdirect us even on a path that's not correct, or keep us on a path that really is to our benefit.
Well, that's a good point, and that brings us up to something without changing too much, but putting a little twist on it, because you mentioned that you've brilliantly worked through some notions for our listeners or our thinkers, and in more specific terms, you urged them to listen, to think, and oftentimes you put those terms in quotes because you're talking about thinking and listening from the perspective of critical thinking as well. And I guess a question that I've always wondered about as we've gone through some of these too is that you've laid out some principles of critical thinking as they apply to this perspective. And when you were writing marginalized and unmeasuring, and only because we've mentioned those, this is running, if not permeating some of the notions in your writing, in your publications. How does that play in to how does the critical thinking process play into unmeasuring, or more specifically into something that you were describing before in marginalized, where we stop listening, we stop thinking, we just get kind of stoic about our ideas and off we go?
I have to tell you, Paul, first of all, you make me sound really smart when you use the word brilliant, and I'm going to caveat that. I am as uninformed as anyone on the planet until I start listening and learning and absorbing and then coming up with some deductive reasoning based on what I found that leads me to a path that becomes very obvious. So when I started this whole venture of writing and everything, I had no clue where to go with it. But then as I started reading about these things and learning and then listening to other people and where their quote unquote heads were, I realized quickly we're all in the same boat. We all have these high opinions, of ourselves. Nah, maybe not. But we have great opinions that we want to share with everyone else. And we're eager to do so. But are we eager to listen to others? And if we're not, and as I listen to this is going to sound, provocative in a way, but if I listen to what the world is telling me today, then if I don't walk in sync with other people who believe differently than I do, then I can be a villain. But on the other hand, if they don't walk with me, they can be a villain. So how do we take that and say, okay, I'm maybe I'm too eager to share my opinion. What if I turn that around and say, again, what if I start really demarginalizing? In other words, not thinking of someone else as if they're in a different political party or a different religion or a different society or different ideology than I am. What if I just started listening to them? And what if I didn't try to form an opinion, but listen to their heart? Now, to do that, I have to encourage that person not to talk in terms of what they think, but how they think. Where did they come from? What was their origins? Not what they've come to believe, but how did those beliefs progress? Kind of like my rutted road. I didn't know till I knew, till I figured it out. Well, what led to that? And once we start getting those origin stories together, we start listening to people differently. We start realizing this person was really affected by events that happened early in their life. And maybe they came up with great or not so great opinions based on that, or mindsets based on that. I'm not so concerned with what they think. I am much more concerned. Well, I won't say I'm not concerned, but I'm much more concerned with how they arrived at this, how they came to this, and vice versa. I want people to be honest in listening to me so that they know that I came from a place that was far different from where I arrived to. That way, we don't marginalize one another, setting people apart because they are quote unquote different or quote unquote not in my sphere or quote unquote don't believe in the powerful things I believe, because my beliefs are so great. What if we're all wrong? And that's the premise of that next book you talk about, which is unmeasuring. What if we stopped measuring? What if we started simply listening without an agenda, without trying to put others in a box or promote ourselves into what I call a covenantal relationship? That's another of those 10-letter words that really speaks to it. In other words, seeking a higher purpose beyond what I think, beyond what someone else thinks, and finding out how we can identify with one another and find a higher cause that we can all pursue together.
Oh, good point. And also, you used the C word, covenantal
The
and
C word.
covenant. I know we don't really have time right now during this particular episode, this part of the interview, to talk about maybe differences between covenant and contract or anything else that may fall therein. Somewhere there's a load of topics. I'm sure that that's another animal altogether.
Well, we
But
could have
because
people
we
go back and look at the other podcasts. They might actually.
there will be a few of those things, and of course I think our plan is to maybe delve a little deeper into those particular
Yeah.
perspectives and those notions, because as you well know, these are becoming even more polarized times than they were when we got started, when your purpose was to introduce a few things. And that raised a question in my head about, because these are currently troubled times, where do we go? And I know that you and I have discussed things in a very uh, in depth manner before, but we've not had the opportunity, or you have not had the opportunity to share that with some of your listeners. And of course, listening is, of course, the key as best as we can, because once people stop listening, then it's very difficult to find common ground. And my question is do you feel in your belief, in your experience, will people continue to polarize, or do you think they'll isolate? People will, the notion of isolation, which is already occurring now due to the pandemic and other things. I'm dating this episode, but do you think people will try to find common ground? Do you think that there's any kind of a convincing argument, hopefully, that can lead people to learn how to listen to one another without insisting upon their own?
I have great hope. I
Always a good answer.
Yeah, I don't have great knowledge because, as I already stated, I can't read people's minds. I don't know what they are thinking. I just am getting a better idea of how people think. So I'll start there and just say, regardless of whether or not we agree with one another's opinions, which is really where you're describing us at right now. We have all agreed to disagree, and it's a terrible place to be. Um, my opinion. There's some out there say this is a great place. Well, God bless you. But regardless of whether or not we agree with one another's opinions, I believe I've learned through my listening quest with people that the biggest what if question we all share is this: uh, what if there is one prevailing truth, Paul? That's a boy, that's going to start a firestorm, I know, but what if there is one prevailing truth? Uh, there was a time of ultimate creation, I believe, in my opinion, somewhere before whatever we all differently believe, before the aliens planted seeds on the earth, before God created the garden, whatever it is, before that, there was a creation that began. Okay. And absolutely before anything else existed. If that's true, there had to be one superior creator. There couldn't be multiples. There could only be one because it was a creation. It had there's how would that happen without that? So if we can honestly, critically explore that idea together, no matter what or where the questions or the answers take us. I mean, I'm not saying that people have to believe as I do, but let's really explore that. Let's not take a position to start with. Let's explore what if there was this creation. Then we have a chance to covenant with one another, to seek out and live out a greater good together beyond what you so aptly called as these troubled times. You know,
I'm not I'm not sure whether that's an understatement or an overstatement, and I know that there's a lot of different there's a good deal of uncertainty. So I think that and like you said, sometimes when people lose hope, they they give up on that whole notion of things like a single truth, a prevailing truth, which of course is a deeper topic and something I'm sure that you and I would like to get into in our next series of Mark My Words. And
I'd
I'm
love
not sure, yeah, and I'm not sure whether we've got enough time to explain what the plan is for next time, next go round, but I'm sure that we'll be able to enlighten folks in
yeah.
another episode somewhere down the line. But for now, Mark, do you have anything else to add? Because I was figuring that we might uh, expend most of our time here on these particular topics. And I really thank you for giving us a bit of your heart and a piece of your past here as well. Is there anything else that you can add or
Well,
you would like to?
yeah, one final thought, and just that I said I have great hope, and it's not a hope based on anything I came up with. It's a hope based on looking over my shoulder behind me at what has happened. Um, it's a hope based on something and some things that happened to me that give me hope for a future. And I want to leave it there because a lot of people are out there going, well, you can hope all you want. Well, they're right. They're right. But my hope is based on a huge experience of things that I've seen turn around for me. And I'm going to keep it very vague, but those are the things that promote for me a serious faith that create for me a serious faith. And we'll talk about that. You know, we can bring in other people's opinions too on this. If they want to email, they can email to Mark C. Writes. That's right as in writing, but Mark C. Writes at gmail.com. Mark spelled with a K, by the way. So, boy, that's I should have put this on paper. Mark C. Writes at gmail.com. They can also catch all these great books. Oh, I call my own books great. Paul, would you call my books great? No, 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 no.
I, I
Joke.
would say that the collection of books that you have, which is extensive, are not only excellent books. I don't care to you be using the words great, but your books are grand
Thank you.
and
Uh,
really enjoy it. They're inspiring. They inspire us to think, which is absolutely one of your goals.
yeah,
And I
that's it.
just want to be able to share that with the other folks. All of this information, of course, is in the previous episodes. But you were going
So,
to say your website.
yeah, I was going to say, so thinkers, if you want to think, as Paul said in quotes, think thinkers and go to www.rutmanagement.com and think with us, think alongside us, and think about your own hope. And let's get back together on this in another episode.
Sounds like a plan to me, Mark. Thank you once again. And thank you, folks, for all listening in or watching this interview and everything. I know that your time is important to all of us, especially to you, and for taking the time to listen to this. Hope we can get together again with all of y'all soon. Mark, I guess we're just done. So if we can hit the
We're
stop, we're
just
good to
done.
go. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good
thank,
day.
thank you very, very much.